few of us are fooled by the smiley false teeth brigade, who like to lead us on into believing things have just fallen into place for them. That if we just do it their way, we too can obtain nirvana. Recovery requires our dedication. No one else, no matter how much they want to, can do it for us. Sounds a bit cliche, doesn't it? Recovery is a fight for survival. Sometimes we miss the point and want to believe that if we do things perfectly and follow the systems religiously, we'll be exempt from the fight. These are some of the things that I look at in this podcast. I hope you enjoy it. The podcast was recorded as a series of lectures given to people in 12-step addiction recovery treatment in the hope that they could find their own spiritual solution to their addictions. There's a Japanese, well, let me just say an Eastern philosophy, because I don't know if it's from Japan or which part of that area it's from, but it's called Kaizen. Has anybody ever heard of Kaizen? Nobody ever heard of Kaizen? And the idea behind Kaizen is that there's a system in Western industrialization where people who come forward with innovative technological ideas to help production in a factory get financially rewarded. So if you're working in a plant and you come up with some more efficient way to make the process line work better, you get rewarded for doing that. And I'm 99% sure that this is a Japanese philosophy. In Japanese factories, they did the research to find out what people prefer, if they prefer these big leaps with a larger sum of money, or whether people prefer just doing small things to improve their work environment. And statistically, they found that people prefer doing small things to improve their work environment. So they adopted the system of manufacture in Japan where people can contribute small ideas to a production line. So an example of that is Toyota. Toyota is a very highly regarded motor manufacturing company, and they've made many, many small incremental strides to improving their product. Now, the idea behind this is just something that was of interest to me, maybe a little bit controversial, I don't know, but they say that imitation is the best form of flattery. And if we look at how the East has developed technologically, they've copied everything that the West has done. So it's been a system of, everybody always used to regard things that came from Taiwan, made in Taiwan and made in China, as garbage. But now everybody wants an iPhone and everybody wants a Samsung that is made in the East. So there's nothing wrong with looking at what somebody's doing and doing it better. I mean, there's a whole system of business that operates just on that kind of mentality. Now, the idea behind Kaizen is that in your ordinary everyday life, it's very difficult. I mean, everybody loves a hero. Everybody loves somebody who can just go and do something spectacular that just impresses everybody. So we love the idea of the virtuoso piano player, the person who just sat behind the piano and could just, play the piano, which unfortunately is not a reality. It requires hours and hours and hours of work to be able to do something properly. So making these huge strides in improving our lives is an unrealistic expectation. So I want to go from being unemployed to running my own business, and it's got to happen. One of the things that they say specifically about business and opening and running your own business is that it takes 3 years to establish your business. Okay, it doesn't really. It takes 5 years. 3 years is what they tell us to make us feel a little bit better about the struggle. It's quite a hard, long process that requires a lot of effort and a lot of learning if you've never done it before. So the idea then being small, incremental things that we can do, and it's always a question that I ask is, what can you do? What are you able to do? So something that we tell the families of addicts, and it's no secret, is we tell the families, just leave the person alone. Don't bail them out, leave them alone. Let them do their thing. If they burn themselves, then they must burn themselves, then they must sort themselves out. But oftentimes families can't do that because it's, oh, my poor precious darling. Little do they know that their darling is running around in the streets like a maniac, robbing people and being a drug addict and a burnout and a loser, and has got skin the size this thick like a rhinoceros. But it's, oh, my precious child, and they can't allow the person to, like learning to ride a bicycle, fall off the bicycle. So then I always pose the question, what can you do? What are you able to do? There's the ideal, but what are you able to do? Just as another random example, I mean, a classic example is like David and Goliath, and we love these stories where the little guy with his sling who was looking after sheep can take out the giant and save the day. Now, the idea behind Kaizen, there can be a bit of a divergence, but what they're talking about is they're talking about improved efficiency over a period of time and improved systems. So businesses, when a business is sold, they sell their systems. That's really what they're selling. I suppose unless maybe you're selling a spa where you're selling a lot of stock, but it's systems that are sold. And trying to implement and establish and perfect your system is part of what Kaizen is talking about. Now, there's two examples here that I can use. The one example is, well, three really, because I've been talking about business. The other example is if you train, if you go to the gym, if you like going to the gym, it would be great if you could go to the gym and certainly for me as a guy, start building muscle and start really getting into shape and start looking like somebody who goes to gym. Unfortunately, I haven't found that to be my experience. And then I look at the guys that are around the gym there, and I'm wondering to myself how many of these guys are using steroids and to look the way that they look. The guesstimate would it be at least half. And certainly something that I've done is get a personal trainer to help me work towards achieving that objective. And I mean, I've been consistently going to gym for 4 or 5 years now. And I would like to be further than where I actually am in terms of gym and systems and the way that I do it, and trying to squeeze more out of the effort that I'm putting in to get the most benefit out of the system. Another example will be, and I know perhaps it's not an example that is a very common example, but if you look at the martial arts, I've spoken previously a little bit about jiu-jitsu, and I want to talk about it just a little bit more. And it can be with any martial art, karate, judo, which is an offshoot of jiu-jitsu. There are parameters that a person needs to operate in to compete. And something that takes a considerable amount of effort and a considerable amount of training and a considerable amount of practice to perfect. Included specifically in jiu-jitsu is competition. So going up against, if you want to go up in the gradings, you have to go up against somebody else to improve your skills. And I learned something interesting about jiu-jitsu, and I was looking at the Japanese jiu-jitsu. There's Brazilian jiu-jitsu and Japanese jiu-jitsu. And Japanese jiu-jitsu from the 1300s. That punching someone is actually only to distract the person so that you can use the other jiu-jitsu techniques to subdue that person. It's something that I thought was quite interesting in that art. So making small incremental changes and improving slowly over a period of time and getting feedback from your environment and from what you are doing to improve your technique is a very noble pursuit. Now, I've looked at Kaizen, and I really, really, really like the philosophy. It's a very, very good philosophy, and it makes a lot of common sense, and it's quite practical because it also takes a lot of pressure off. The problem that I've encountered, and it's I think it was quite interesting when I started thinking about this, is that a lot of the messages that we get from people who talk about the stuff that I'm talking about now, which is really self-improvement. How do I improve myself? How do I become better at what it is that I'm doing? Hardly ever talk to you or hardly ever speak about the guys that I listen to, just how much of a struggle it actually is, and just how really hard it is to improve and to change and to get ahead, and how long that struggle takes. So the classic example, you speak to a business consultant or a business coach, or I've done it myself, where you find someone to try and help you improve your systems and improve your structures, and they'll sell you a great idea. The implementation is something completely different, and they charge a fortune, absolutely huge amount of money. And really what happens is you get to meet with that person every now and again. The work you have to do yourself. You have to do everything yourself. The real struggle really gets spoken about. How hard it is and how much failure is actually associated with getting anywhere. Now you can think for yourself, if you compete in a ring with somebody and you've really been working on your technique, and quite possibly, which is something that does happen, is somebody who is not as good as you, technique-wise, kicks your ass, will punch you in the face, and then you've got to go back into the competition or back to the dojo the next day, back to training, being around these people. What is it that differentiates somebody who has very good technique from somebody who doesn't have good technique are they just lucky? Because I look at a lot of people out there in the world, and I look at very successful people, and I look at what awful people they are. And I wonder to myself, how is it that these clowns are doing so well, but they're such jerks? And I work so hard, and I try so hard to maintain my standards, and I try to do everything right, but I'm still getting my ass kicked, and I'm still coming out second best. So you can really look at and equate technique something along the lines of machinery. A machine in a production line that does a specific job. But we all know that machines break. We all know that machines become obsolete, and machines need to be upgraded, and they get chucked away. So is perfecting your technique ultimately what we are looking for? Having the correct systems in place. We were having a chat in the office about Pol Pot. Who knows who Pol Pot is? There must be one or two. This is a communist pot. Implementing socialist ideas into his society, rules and systems and structures, killed millions and millions and millions of people. Is that the way? Are we reliant on finding the perfect system to implement, to follow perfectly, and to continually add to that system to improve it, so that we can achieve our goal and that we can achieve our objective? Where what might happen is we might step into the ring with somebody who is not so interested in systems and perfect technique, and they'll take us out, and they'll take us down. We'll get taken down. There's something interesting happened to me along these lines. So when I opened up the treatment center in Pretoria in the very beginning of Crossroads, which was 7.5 years ago, it was very, very important to me that Crossroads succeeded and that Crossroads became successful. I had borrowed money, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing that money. It was just not an option. I was also quite well known in the recovery community in Pretoria, and I didn't want to look bad by failing. I didn't want to look bad by failing at starting up this treatment center, because in running a treatment center, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And it was my absolute mission to make sure that this thing ran perfectly without any mistakes. I was going to succeed no matter what the cost was going to be. Add on to that, the working with the guys in the center. So sitting and doing the counseling and doing the groups. So there's the whole business side of the thing, people's perception of me, my perception of people's perceptions of me, and the actual work that I was doing in the treatment center, which is exactly the same work that you guys are doing now 7 years later with your counselors. And my name was signed on the bottom of all the paperwork. And what resulted was that a year into running the treatment center, I was on the verge of being suicidal. I couldn't sleep. I was sleeping 2 hours a night. And I started having panic attacks all the time, every day. 2, 3, 4 panic attacks a day. I absolutely buckled under all the pressure that was being asked of me. Now, at this stage, I was 14 years sober. I was, in the program for quite a long time, which is why I had opted to open the treatment center. I had a sponsor. I was seeing a psychologist as part of doing the right thing. I was seeing a recovery coach who was helping me with the treatment center. I was going to AA and NA meetings consistently on a regular basis. I was doing everything right. I was doing everything. If you had looked at everything there was not a thing that I was doing wrong system-wise. But I collapsed under the pressure of expectation. And even saying collapsing under the pressure of expectation doesn't adequately describe what it was that I was experiencing that caused so much difficulty for me. I've subsequently learned what was happening is I was having this overwhelming desire to drink. This is the most strangest thing. I hadn't drank in 14 years. Hadn't thought about drinking. It was the furthest thing from my mind. And then all of a sudden, it just started. Just overwhelming urge to drink. Now, I know myself well enough to know that if I drink, either I'm drinking or I'm not drinking. If I drink, I'm going to get arrested, the police are going to get involved, and I'm going to spend all my money and I'm going to lose everything, and I'm going to go to jail. That's what happens when I drink. That's my drinking CV. 8 arrests, 4 treatment centers, 2 criminal records. That's what happens when I put alcohol in my body. I was terrified of that happening. And I didn't know what to do, because I would speak to my psychologist and the recovery coach and the sponsor, and I would speak to these people and go to the meetings and listen. But I was still overwhelmed with the desire to drink and panic like I've never experienced in my life ever before, that just wouldn't stop and it just wouldn't go away. Add to that, I was sleeping for 2 hours a night. And I slept probably for 2 hours a night for a year and a half. So anybody who like whines about not being able to sleep, whatever. I didn't know what to do. So, the reason why I mention the story and why I raise the story is that when you sit in an AA meeting and an NA meeting, and you look at the people that are there for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, that doesn't just happen. That's just not something that just fell into somebody's lap. There's a tremendous amount of ups and downs that go into somebody sticking around and staying sober in AA and NA. It's not easy. We don't get a free ride or a free pass just because we've stopped drinking. Now, I don't believe that I experienced those levels of pain and those levels of dysfunction because of drinking. Yes, that didn't happen to me because of the drinking, because I'd been sober for 14 years. That happened to me because of the way that I was looking at things. My perception. That's why that happened to me. And when it happened, it was bad. It was very, very, very bad. So, systems are important because it turns out that the people that were around me were the ones who helped me come back. But we'll get to that part of the story. Well, in fact, let me talk about it now. A guy I had sponsored who was 3 years sober. Now, you must know I'm like 15 years sober. He's 3 years sober. Working with me in the treatment center, I said to him, listen, I need to talk. Let's go and have a coffee. And we went down to the Irene Mall. And I said to him, listen, I can't do this anymore. I got to go. This place has pushed me over the edge. I can't work in this environment anymore. And he gave me 3 options. He said to me, okay, that's great, you can go, but you need to pay me double. And I couldn't do that because there was no money. 2, you need to go into rehab for relapse prevention because it looks like you're on the edge here. And my pride would not allow me to do that. Mr. Dominic, Mr. Recovery, Mr. Owner of the treatment center, been sober for so long, there's no way I was going into rehab. And number 3 was surrender. That was all that he said to me. And we left. That was the end. And it was from that point that I started applying surrender to my life. Now, there were no explanations around what surrender is, and no long discussions around what surrender is. It was a case of, these are pretty much your options, and this was one option that I hadn't tried that I could look at, which then became a central focus of my life from that point onwards. There's a thing called the lexicographical rule. And what the lexicographical rule says is that we would rather create these big, all-encompassing, perfect systems. And the example will be like large-scale farming is a very good example of a lexicographical rule, where what we need is we need to produce more livestock for the population at the expense of the environment. Just more. It's as opposed to, less waste. So not such huge systems. So again, like the chicken farms, I would say another would be these huge pharmaceutical companies that produce these millions of drugs and are just trying to see how they can use what where and make things fit all over the place across broad spectrums. As opposed to less waste. As opposed to people taking more responsibility for what it is that they put in their bodies. But that's not what the focus is. And that's not where marketing lies. Marketing lies in as much as you possibly want. We have it available for you in as many flavors, with or without whatever additives you need. And we don't care what the impact is going to be on anything, because all that we are interested in is maximizing the benefit to us. So then, what does it come down to? The stuff that I've been looking at and what I've been thinking about is that it comes down to who you are as a person. Your character. What is your character? Who are you? Are you somebody that is willing to withhold, willing to keep the truth hidden for your own ends and for your own gain? Are you somebody who is willing to manipulate the facts, who is willing to manipulate reality to create something that isn't? So then I use the example that I shared with you of my own life. It was so important for me to have this image of how things are supposed to be, as opposed to what is, what the reality of my circumstances are. What is the truth? What is the truth about my circumstances? So it's not so much about David and Goliath as it is about people overcoming overwhelming odds and circumstances in their own personal lives. You know, for us here in the treatment center, alcohol and drugs, for now, is the mountain to overcome. And if you've had a look at your AA book, and I'm sure your counselor will have pointed it out to you, that the alcohol and the drugs really are only a symptom, a big arrow pointing at a problem. And we are not unique in the problems that we face in this world. And for the surprising amount of problems that there are, and the surprising amount of different perspectives that different people have, there really is only one solution to the problem of addiction and the problem of alcohol. The problem of life, facing life. It's so cliche, so many people say it, facing life on life's terms, the way that it actually is. And that is surrender, and that is letting go. You know, Harry Potter, I think we like the idea of Harry Potter, that you're just born into this thing knowing how it's supposed to work and how it's supposed to be. It's a fantasy story. Harry Potter's story is a fantasy story. It doesn't work that way. Everybody loves the underdog. It is. The ones that come from the furthest behind and make it. Those are the ones that we want to see. Those are the stories that we want to hear. The people who overcome insurmountable obstacles. Nobody really cares about somebody who's born with a trust fund, and how great they're doing. Lucky you. It's not a case of jealousy. It's what we as a society appreciate and admire. when I talk about surrender, whose actual responsibility is it to define what that is, what that means? It's, I can go some ways to try and explain it and to try and quantify it, but even that in and of itself is not what the object of the exercise is about. What it means for you will be what it means for you, and the application that you try to apply to it is the application that you try to apply to it. Imagine if now I have to, or let's just say our government starts implementing a system of everybody must surrender. I think that's what they try to do under the apartheid system. Bring out the army. Destroy generations upon generation upon generation on both sides. If surrender is something as paradoxical, if I had to put it in a phrase, as taking action by not taking action, how do you quantify that? How do you put that out there into a system, or help people with a phrase like that? It's so silly. I mean, it was Bruce Lee, and I'm sure some of you have heard me say this. He said in the movie, "The art of fighting without fighting." What does it mean? It's so up in the air. It's such a generalized statement. Try not to figure out what is going on because you don't know what you're doing. It's also a crazy statement in isolation without any context. But these are the principles of surrender. If one of the analogies that I've heard that I like very much is spirituality and surrender is like being in a river. If you go against the flow, if you're swimming upstream, or if you're swimming out of the current, then you're not surrendered. Again, such a bizarre statement. So really what I'm saying is how can systems quantify and give you exactly, or even put it in a pill and say to you, this is it, you take this and you'll be fine. You don't have to do anything because it's impossible. It doesn't exist that way. The directions are there. The first page of the NA Step Working Guide, it says the first thing that we must do is surrender. That's what it says, and then it goes on into all the rest of the text. How you interpret that and how you identify that and what you do with that information. That's what counts. That's what's important. I want to just close with one last statement. There's a lot of addicts that I speak to, that I work with in the treatment center. I always ask them the question, what is your earliest memories of not feeling like you fitted in? And at the very center of that statement is huge feelings of non-self-acceptance. There's a lot of rejection of the self. If the ultimate goal is for us to be kind to ourselves and to accept ourselves with the flaws that we have. Accept ourselves as we are. Me making a statement like that is an absolute meaningless statement unless you try and understand what it is that I'm talking about. Because many, many people say, oh, you just have to love yourself. And it's such BS, such rubbish. Meaningless and insignificant waffle. The actual application of that is something completely different.